Collin Moshman playing as Sngman101. We have two $5 Senegos, and the first hand in the bottom left is already kind of interesting because I'm second to act with Ace-Jack, and you're going to notice that I'm simply going to fold the hand. And we also have another decision early on the other table, and this one you could certainly limp. I don't like the raise very much, and I'm going to go ahead and just fold it. And part of the reason I'm doing that is because these two games I'm really going to look at it from the perspective of beating from somebody without a lot of sitting go experience. So we're going to try to look at a very basic strategy, and the very basic strategy for beating sitting goes, we just looked in some of my recent videos at basic strategies for looking at heads-up games, which involve being pretty loose aggressive. And in the sitting go, it's going to be just the opposite. We're going to be hyper tight in the beginning. And the reason for that, as I've discussed before, is that when your opponents make a mistake and get involved early during low blind play, then you win money. Everybody else wins money. So the classic example here is you've got two guys going all in early, one with pocket twos and one with ace king. And the idea is that if we ignore the very low blinds, then these hands are basically equal. Okay, twos is a slight favorite over the ace king. But if you look at two equal hands going all in, even though none are going to gain or win chips in the long run, they're both going to lose equity, the dollar value of chips, because they're both, at a 50-50 gamble, going to double up or lose all their chips. But when they double up their chips, they're not doubling up their equity. Okay, so in these $5 matches, for instance, 1,500 chips would double to 3,000, but $5 in equity wouldn't double to $10. Okay, it would double to something less, something like, I don't know, $9.50 or $9.75, which we can look at with an ICM calculator, and I'll talk a little more about ICM later. But essentially, you're risking all your chips to less than double up all your money. And when other guys do this, the equity that they lose, so for instance, instead of going from 5 to 10, maybe they go from 5 to 9.75, and that extra 25 cents gets distributed to the remaining players who benefit because there's one fewer player who can potentially finish in the money. So one way to take advantage of this kind of unusual aspect of sitting goes, very distinct from cash, is simply to play very tight early. And particularly at these low stakes, let our reckless opponents get involved too much, and we will reap the benefits of this in the long run. And you can no longer do that when the blinds get high, but we'll look at that, and meanwhile during low blinds, the most basic winning strategy is to play an extremely tight game. So how tight? Well, when you enter the flop, if you don't have a piece, you're never going to bluff or anything like that. And pre-flop, you're only going to play premium hands. So from early position, you're going to fold ace-jack. You're even going to fold ace-queen. The only ace you're going to play is ace-king. If it's an ace less than big slick, you fold, and big slick you're going to raise. Pocket pairs from early position, you're going to want 10 or higher. Okay, with 10s, jacks, queens, aces or kings as well, you raise. And with lower pairs, you'll simply fold. And from mid position, you can open with ace-queen, late position, ace-jack, and same with the pairs. Okay, from mid or late position, for instance, you can raise with pocket eights, but it doesn't matter exactly what hands you play. Now, I look at this in a little more detail in sitting go strategy, and you can get more specifics if you want to consult that, or you can ask me about hands. But basically, if you're not very confident that you're opening a very strong hand relative to your position, stronger than you would need in cash or regular tournament, you should simply go ahead and fold the hand. Okay. And in the meanwhile, I'll remind everybody what I always do about the statistics I use. So, number of hands is going to be the first one. that the sample size is based on. So this means, for instance, on Plebini, we have 11 hands to base this off of. He sees 27.3% of flops, raises before the flop 18.2% of the time, and is not very aggressive after the flop, with that last number not being quite as useful. And as the blinds go up, we're going to have to play more, but we're still going to do it in a very basic strategy. And one thing you might say is, if you can beat these games just by being really tight early, doesn't that mean it's sort of a mechanical format? You don't necessarily have to be very creative to beat these games, and the answer is definitively yes. So even a guy like me, who's obviously very into Singos, okay, I call myself your Sngman101, and yes, that is the same SNG as in Sit and Go. um, but yeah, I mean, you just can't deny the fact that these are at heart pretty mechanical games. Okay, that really can be beaten simply by being very tight and applying very strict hand selection early, and then by loosening up late. And we're going to look at a very specific way that you can target those late blind hands that are going to be the most profitable. And this is one reason why it's pretty easy to begin multi-tabling with these games. And in particular, so here we only have 2 tables, which it doesn't take very long to get to the point where you can 2-table these games. And certainly a lot more once you get used to that. And that's because you can simply fold so many hands. So what happens, for instance, when you make a pretty tight fold, like laying down pocket nines in early position? Well, if you had a good player who was pretty used to the Sit and Go format and was very confident, he could absolutely play nines from early position and show a profit. And that's normally what you'll do. But you're not going to make a lot of money on average playing nines early. And the idea is that you're going to stick to only hands that are really big favorites. Because when you're not making a lot, and you combine that with the natural tight is good format that pays off in the Sit and Go, you simply are not going to be losing out on very many opportunities unless you fold hands that are blatantly winners, like pocket queens in late position. Okay, it would be one that you would obviously want to play. And sort of the cool thing about this is that even if you're naturally a tighter player, then the hands that are really obviously going to be profitable will be fairly clear to you. Okay, so even if you're naturally sort of tight passive, you're probably going to be inclined to enter the pot in late position with a high pocket pair or a suited ace queen. Okay, so far we haven't seen a single hand where you really be letting letting go of a lot of value simply by folding. Okay, the ace-jack early on. In fact, I would normally fold that ace-jack early. If you look at Harrington on Holdem, he calls, I believe he says he'd usually throw away ace-10 and sometimes even ace-jack, so that's not too big a mistake, even in normal tournament play. And it's certainly not a big mistake in the Sit and Go, particularly if you're playing a very tight style. And even when you're playing very tight, particularly at these low stakes, that doesn't mean that you can't get paid off when you value bet your strong hands. And that's because a lot of guys aren't paying very close attention, or they simply don't care or want to gamble. So when I talk about low blinds, to be a little more concrete, with the Pokersavvy structure, I'm thinking mainly of 10-20 and 15-30. And again, my mid-blind classification is 25-50, 50-100, and 75-150 and up would be high blind. Now, this particular hand, if you wanted to go ahead and fold this, you could, and it would not be a big mistake. But since we're at these six-handed points, this is like under the gun in a six-handed game, I'm going to go ahead and open with the sevens. Even this hand, though, you could fold it, and you certainly wouldn't be losing a lot. So absolutely feel free to do that. And meanwhile, if there are more limps and nobody raises, we'll gladly check behind with a suited 9-6. In fact, I'll even let the check fold button. If somebody raises, there's simply no way I'm going to call a bet. And that's not a big mistake either. So this Jack-King suited is a definite fold. Because if there hadn't been a limper, you want to at least pause a few seconds before you fold. Even if you know you're going to fold to a blind steal, because you don't want to look blind and defensive. But when there's already a limper in, and you know you're not going to call a raise anyway, particularly if you're multi-tabling, that's the time when it's fine to just hit the check fold button. Okay, now here we're getting 5-1 with ace-7, and again, you don't know what to do, just muck it. So if you want to call, that's fine, you could eke out a low profit. The problem is, you've got to know how to play a little after the flop when you do that. So, when I say that this is more for new Sit-and-Go players, I'm assuming you don't have an extensive no-limit background in another form of game. And the more background you do have, the more you can open up a little. So for instance, with an ace-jack or something from MP1, which would be 3 to the left of under the gun, then in a full-handed game, if you can play these hands and not go broke when you flop top pair, and it turns out that somebody's very clearly telling you that they have you beat, then you can open up a little more. But if you don't really have much background in post-flop no-limit play, then give yourself a very easy decision in any of these situations when it's marginal and simply fold. So this queen 9 I would normally fold anyway. If I were playing my normal game, I would raise on the button, but with a very tight aggressive style, I would again muck from the button. So another way to look at the how tight can you play question is through stats, and from a stats perspective, if the VPIP, so how often you're voluntarily paying down to the pot, PFR, those are around 8-6 or even 7-5. That's very tight, but that's still absolutely fine. Okay, you can still definitely beat these games, particularly the low stakes ones, with very tight and conservative stats like that. And in fact, you'll be much better off trying to beat them that way than if you get involved and splash around too much, particularly when you don't have a very extensive no-limit background. You're going to find that it's a lot easier to just play very tight. If you don't like the situation, get out, leave early. Only play a big pot when you're very confident you want to play a big pot. Okay, when you're very confident you're getting the best of it. Something I know Ed Miller has said. I was reading No Limit Theory in Practice for the first time, I don't know, whenever it came out, and there's that really awesome section that I think they call the pot size philosophy, which is big hands, big pots, small hands, small pots. Now, you don't always know whether your hand is quote-unquote big or small, and one aspect of becoming good at no limit is being able to judge that based on the action that's going on around you and your hand, the texture of the flop, that kind of stuff. But the idea is that when you don't know whether you have a big hand or not, go on the assumption that you don't. Okay, so when you have aces or you flop a set or whatever, you know that you do. And otherwise, just go on the assumption you don't. And you'll notice that even though we haven't been playing hardly at all, on the left-hand table, we still have our normal starting stack. Just in the one hand during 1530, we raised in middle position with sevens, and everyone folded to us. And in the right table, we're only down around 150 chips, which isn't so bad. Okay, we saw a couple of flops, mainly from the blinds, that we could have connected with, we didn't, and even so, we haven't lost a lot of chips. And even though during 2550, you would raise a little more often when it's folded to you on the button, but you wouldn't open up that much. And during 50-100, the extra times you want to open up, again, you can still play very tight. When you have a strong hand in late position, you want to come in and look to take the blinds. And other than that, continuing to play very quality cards. So it's not until usually later than a lot of players feel that they're really forced into making a move. Okay, so for instance here, even though I've played pretty much no hands, I'm down to 1300. With 13 blinds, I'm not going to be looking to force a play. Okay, I absolutely still have fold equity if I go in to steal the blinds. By fold equity, I just mean that everyone could reasonably fold to me, and my stack isn't too short even to steal the blinds. Here you can raise, but I'll be conservative and just check it. And if he checks, you can certainly bet now. And again, I'll play very tight. I'll assume I don't have much no-limit background and check behind. But if he checks again, I am going to bet the turn. And that's something I feel pretty strongly about, even if you're not too experienced. If the guy checks to you on 2 consecutive streets, you should go ahead and bet around half the pot. So if he had checked, I would have bet around 125. And that's just because if a person is showing overwhelming weakness and it's heads up, you've got position on him, then you should attack that at some point. But that still is it's definitely a winning situation, but it's not going to be massively positive expectation, massively chip winning. And that is our theme, finding plays that are most certainly going to be winning us chips. And one of the most key ones we'll see is when the blinds get to around 75-150, or any time that we have a stack of 10 blinds or fewer, so during 50-100, that would be any stack under 1K. Then, if everyone folds to you in the small blind, you can raise all in with a very wide range of hands. Certainly any ace, any pocket pair, any couple of face cards, but even if you do it with a hand like Deuce 3 offsuit, you're not going to be winning chips, but it's not going to be too big a loss either. So that's always a good thing. When it's folded to you in the small blind, you're getting short stacked, you can come in with a very wide range of hands. And the way you know whether it's positive expectation, whether it's winning you chips, is by looking at software like SNG Power Tools, or the one I prefer, SNG Wizard, which I will do after this video. And if you're a Stoxpoker member, you have access to my free tutorial on Wizard. So we'll look at just what I mean with that, but that pertains to this idea of ICM that I won't go into a lot now. But basically, it's just a way of, we talked earlier about the difference between chips and equity, so chips and dollar values, of turning chip decisions into dollar decisions. And the software is just going to automate that process for us. So here, if I had a stack a few hundred less, I might be able to shove this. But we're too deep stacked for that, with 12 big blinds. I'm not going to shove a junk hand. And here with under 10 blinds, if, say it's folded to, so now we're going to fold to an early position raise, but if the small blind had limped on us, we would just go ahead and shove all in. And that is another excellent technique when the effective stacks are 10 big blinds or fewer, and you're in the big blind, everyone folds the small blind, who completes throwing in that extra half bet. You should raise all in with pretty much any two cards, and that'll be profitable. If everyone folded to me here, I would have shoved my deuce 3 for a stack well under 10 blinds. And we are seeing now that I'm starting to get short stacked, which is fine, because we really haven't been getting a ton of cards besides just wanting to play tight. So just because you want to play tight doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go card dead. And a lot of times by this point we would have hit a couple more hands and managed to maintain a stack closer to the average stack. We're even doubling up. But the idea is that we're playing very low risk so that we're not forced in these situations at all. Now, what have we learned from our opponent's statistics? Well, the only very loose guy at the right table appears to be Peklank, who has a VPIP of 56.7. And meanwhile, on this table, we have a pretty decent hand in mid-late position, and you could fold if you don't know what to do, and I'm going to go ahead and shove this. And we'll look afterward at Synagogue Wizard and see if this is a profitable shove. But the idea is that with under 10 blinds, you want to be looking to shove a little more widely when you've got a pretty strong hand and it's folded to you in mid-late position. So what hands are profitable to shove is something that you kind of get used to as you go along and you plug hands into the software and get used to short stack high blind play. But you definitely, with a strong hand from mid-late position and under 10 blinds and chips, when you do raise, you raise all in because a smaller raise is going to pocket mid you, and you do it with a good number of strong hands. So for instance, we could have shoved all in there with King Queen, Ace 10, and hands like that, and we'll look and see the exact range that's profitable to have shoved there in our post-game review. So here again, if it's folded to the small blind and he completes, we would shove. Against this guy we'll fold. And here at this table as well, the loosest player, I guess, is Black Plowman with 25, which is kind of loose, playing 25% of hands, but not crazy loose. And once again, we see that even at the very low stakes games, there are not a ton of hyper loose players, at least in this particular go, which goes to show that low stakes tables can have decent players, high stakes tables can have terrible players, and it's a lot more a function of the individual table than generalizations you can make based on stake. Okay, fold on the left, we'll shove pretty much any two with these 8 or 9 blind stacks, 8 blind stacks. And again, that's because, if this guy has any kind of standards, he's going to be folding enough immediately that the times he does call and we gamble as a 2-1 or 70-30 underdog, we will be subsidized for those times by the frequency with which he folds. Now, when do we have to force a player? Stack is getting kind of low here. When the blinds get to 100, 200, and that's where they're going to hit us at again next orbit, okay, because it's going up within 1 minute, they hit us again and we only have 620. Well, that is very marginal, so pretty much, unless we get absolute trash every hand, we're going to be strongly looking to force a play. Meanwhile, Ace-Jack from lay position is very definitively worth a shove. Assuming this guy doesn't shove. If he shoves, that complicates things a little bit, because what we'd have to ask ourselves is, could he be shoving a worse hand? And if he had, I think it's pretty unlikely he'd be shoving ace-9, and like suited ace-10 is certainly possible. A lot of the time he'd be around 45% against a pocket pair. So here I definitely fold. And you just want to think what the other guy could be shoving with, and whether or not you're ahead of his range. So I think there I probably would have needed ace-queen to call. Here we're really going to be looking to make a move, and queen-king is perfect, so I would actually shove a good deal less, certainly king-10 for instance, and I can guarantee that this is a profitable one to shove. And we're going to flip against the low pair. Oh, nice flop. Come on, baby. Come on, baby. No club? Oh, I knew it was going to be the club. That's so messed up. Okay. Fair enough. So here we have a pot of 1355. It costs us 855 to call. We're getting about 3 to 2 pot odds. And with the mid-suited jack, that's not good enough. The main rule here is you look at the pot odds. If your hand isn't super good, you want to be getting at least 2 to 1 odds. Okay, so if you're getting 2 to 1 odds and you have kind of a weak hand, then you can make a pot odds call very widely. And that's because, again, the most common worst case scenario is being up against 2 overcards, since good overcard hands really outnumber the pairs. So if you have 2-5 offsuit and you're getting 3 to 1, you can usually make a profitable call. Here I'm going to shove this. We've got 5 blinds on the button, and you can really go all in with a lot of hands here. And another way to analyze it is, what if you had about double your stack from the small blind? And so we've got about 5 blinds. With 10 blinds we would shove from the small blind with the suited jack. So we'll shove from the button with 5. And hope for the best. Looking good. Come on, no ace, no 5. No ace, no 5. Alright. Recently I've taken to screaming at the monitor. Just letting you know exactly what I want. So here we're going to play this, and we're not willing to fold. You've got 2 choices. You could either make a raise and then call an all-in if one was made, or you can just shove yourself. If you don't know what to do, it's better to shove yourself, so that's what I'll do. But if you did raise here to around 600, you would absolutely have to call an all-in re-raise because your hand is too strong. And a lot of the time, when you do that, not only are you getting good odds, but you could very easily be up against a lower pair or flipping, and you definitely win a lot of chips with that call. So this guy could have made a shove with pretty much any 2 cards, and it wouldn't be so bad because he's on the button, shoving around 6 or 7 blinds. And again, when 10 blinds, you can shove very widely from the small blind when it's folded to you, and correspondingly with 5 or 6 blinds, you can shove very widely from the button. Now suppose everyone folds here to the small blind who goes all in. We would have to call that bet because of odds and the fact that he should be shoving well more than any ace. And that's another one where you'll learn pretty quick by looking at old hands you've played with our software evaluation that I'll demonstrate. And here I'm going to fold, and this guy has been raising on our blind a lot, but I'm not going to go all in with the re-steal, in part because if I do when he does call, I'm almost certainly going to be a 70 to 30 underdog against a better ace or a pocket pair. with my low offsuit queen, if I had under 2k I would shove, and I don't think I'm going to show a profit here shoving. And if you're in any kind of DAO with over 10 blinds and chips, so here we have around 12 blinds, then don't shove and just fold. Hands that are profitable to shove with 12 blinds include pocket deuces and ace deuce offsuit. Again, those are just ones you can begin to learn as you play. Here, if either of these guys shove, we'll obviously call due to hand strength, and we figure to be ahead of this guy. Okay, so we'd obviously rather that he had a high card hand until we flop top 2 pair, baby. Yeah, come on. Yeah. Okay. We have a nice little stack for ourselves to play around with. Okay, now you see these chips in the center. These are called antes, so I'm sure you guys know. And how do antes mess with things? Well, with the antes, there's a lot more to be won immediately, so a steal is a good deal more profitable. And in particular, you notice that the starting pot, before anybody acts, is 425. So here, you could raise this to be kind of borderline raise, but that's kind of like if there weren't any antes, but the blinds were 150 and 300. Because in that case, we would have a starting pot of 450, which is very close to 425. And yeah, with 153, I mean, you'd realize, hey, there's a lot on the table, but it's sometimes more subtle to see when it's there in the form of ante-money. So when the difference in starting pots is between 300 and 450, and when that difference is accounted for in blinds, it can be a lot more obvious than when it's an ante-money. Now we're on the bubble, and this is a very good time for accumulating chips, because guys are going to be very tight, and they're not going to be looking to call widely. So here we have a mid-offsuit ace in the button that's certainly good enough to enter the pot, and I'm going to enter for a normal raise of 2.5 blinds. If the small blind goes all in, we'll have to fold, and if this guy went all in, we'd have to look at the pot odds, but I think they'd be good enough that we'd be getting close to 2 to 1 and have to call. You could raise this one again. It's very rare as the chip leader or one of the chip leaders on the bubble. You can come in with a small raise and show a little profit. But I'm going to play this one a little tighter so that even if you're not sure what to do, you realize that at this stage 2, it's tough to play too tight. Okay, you can still stick to hands so a7 for instance, obviously you wouldn't be too excited during low blind play, but for four-handed play, particularly high blinded four-handed play, it looks like a pretty good hand. So my normal style is to be very aggressive at this phase, and you should still be willing to play hands and put guys a little at risk, but if you don't know a good way to do that, just make sure you got some kind of hand. So here, for instance, with Queen 10, I've got a hand. Okay, this isn't necessarily a monster, but Queen 10 on the button is a fine hand, and I'm going to raise with it. And again, the decision making isn't super tough. If a guy with a lot of chips, like this guy, comes over top, then you fold. And with this guy, you look at the pot odds, and pretty much, if you're getting better than 2 to 1, you should call pretty widely, and otherwise not. So, obviously aces, the mother hand, we gladly raise and hope we get re-raised. And even when we don't, we still pick up a nice 400 chips. So you'll notice that on the left table, even though we've pretty much been sticking to, if not premium hands, ones that are very solid and not at all bluffy, given the blinds and positions, and we are currently chip leader. So, a sample size of 1 or 2 games isn't super scientific, but the trend will hold, I guarantee it. Okay, if you simply play a tight, aggressive game, sticking with solid value in cards, you're going to absolutely come out okay. And that's a very good way to begin learning how to beat Sit and Goes, is by focusing almost exclusively on hand selection, as well as these basic rules like when you get to under 10 blinds from the small blind, shove very wide, 5 blinds from the button, shove very wide, getting 2 to 1 on a call, call very wide, and, again, pretty mechanical rules like that go a long way in beating these games. So in this hand we gain a lot because we're automatically placed in the money. We gain a lot more. Save Pluto, for instance, gains a lot more than we do because it was a lot more likely he'd be Bubble Boy than us if our opponent 2 to the left hand had been eliminated. But any time that you're playing the bubble and the first guy gets knocked out, everybody left is automatically in the money and benefits correspondingly. So we benefit again in this hand, assuming the aces hold up, because now we automatically go from 3rd place to 2nd place. Okay, now the worst we can do is finish 2nd, and because that equity goes up, so we didn't gain any chips in that last hand. Okay, we started off with 4,000, we ended with 4,000, and despite not increasing chips at all, we still gain an equity. Okay, in this hand, with 10 blinds or fewer, we're only going to play shove or fold, and with a king, any king, we're going to shove. So with exactly 10 blinds almost, we're shoving any ace, any king, any pocket pair, do face cards. And with any shorter stacks, we will go ahead and shove the 6-9, which you can do very wide when your opponent limps. But this hand is kind of weak and we're not super short stacked, so I'll go ahead and check and bet if I hit any kind of piece, which I do. And our opponent has also shown weakness, so this is a fine time to come in with a bet. This hand does figure to be best, so I wouldn't classify it as a bluff at all. And we're not committing ourselves to the hand. Okay, so if he calls and the river comes a diamond, or maybe if he, if he even shoved at that after that bet, we could just fold. But with a hand that figures to be best, we simply bet. Okay, now we flop trips, and you could go ahead and bet, or you could check. I'll check, and if he checks behind, I certainly won't continue to slow play into the turn. I'll bet the turn. And I really don't think he has a 10, so I'll hope that he thinks I'm bluffing. And you could also bet the flop there to build the pot. And if he had gone over top of me that hand, I absolutely would have been willing to play for an all-in, since only a 10 would have me beat. Okay, he's limped around 3 times, and I'm going to continue this pattern of checking, but if you wanted to shove, that's also fine. And pretty much the reason I'm checking is because I have a stack here of 11 or 12 blinds, and normally you don't want to play shove fold with that kind of stack depth, but you certainly can. And you can also, I'm folding a lot of these, you can also limp. So for instance, I'll limp this one. This is kind of a Harrington limp because they're antes, and we're getting better than 3 to 1 with position. So the reason you don't always do that is because your opponent can, and when you do limp, he checks, you should normally bet, I'll bet 425, half the pot, which is a pretty common bet. And if you want to play shove fold and not limp, you are absolutely fine to do that, because that's mainly how high blind heads up play works. Okay, if he had limped, we would raise this time for value, and we're just going to shove with a hand that looks strongly best for heads up. And that's fine if he calls. Either way is fine. If he folds, we win 2,000 chips without any kind of a fight. And if he calls, we figure to be a nice favorite. So he probably has, I don't know, a low ace, a low pocket pair. But notice there that he was getting over 2 to 1, and if he's not going to call that, then he shouldn't be willing to have made the bet. Sorry about that, I have the Stoxpoker type database up, and I'm going to go ahead and shove this with under 10 blinds. Which again you can do pretty much with any two cards when your opponent limps, particularly when you haven't done a lot already. And now you could, this is not strong enough to shove, you could fold it, and I'm going to go ahead and limp since our opponent seems a little on the passive side. And like always, after I limp, not always, but pretty regularly, I'll go ahead and just fire out half the pot. And that is a pretty good risk-reward ratio. If you take it one time in 3, you show an automatic profit. And in a situation like that, if he raises or calls and bets, pardon me, you have an easy fold. So now the effective stacks are still around 10 blinds, but we have a weak hand, and last time he limped we shoved. So we'll just check, play hit to win. And shoving is great, but you don't want to do it too many times in a row, because usually guys will feel kind of like you're taking away their ego a lot. I'll just shove the 10 king when you keep on shoving on them, and they begin calling a little more wide. So I don't like to shove with trash multiple hands in a row. He calls. Okay, and we still have about 40% equity going into the flop. And okay, we have 10 left. Oh man. That's messed up. It's almost like worsening the heart. But hey, we still took second. So that's not so bad. I mean, yeah. Now the question is, could we have done better? No, from a low blind standpoint, that's tough to say. And pretty much if you want to find out, you can review your hands, you can post them on the awesome Sngman101 forum here at Stoxpoker, as well as other public forums, or talk about them with people. But for the high blind play, we can look pretty quantitatively at this wizard program, and we're going to do that right now, so let me pull that up. Okay, so here we have up Sngman101 Wizard, and what it does is it gives every hand and some interesting info. So it looks like we have one red X right off the bat, and that's it. The yellow triangles again are words of warning, and if anytime you go all in for over 10 blinds, it'll give you this mark which says you don't usually want to go all in with over 10 blinds, which is true. In fact, it's been a big theme of our discussion. But for instance, that's what it is with these pocket jacks, and I'm going to stick instead to the red, and let's see the hand it didn't like. Okay, it was this ace 7 of hearts that I shoved relatively early, and here we have a pushing equity of 9.2 and a fold equity of 9.34. So what does that mean in English, you might ask? Well, what is our starting equity? Let's assume that this was 10-man rather than 9-man, because that makes the math a lot easier. Now, with a $5 buy-in, you've got 10 guys contributing $5 each for a total equity of $50 on the table. And your equity in the beginning of that is going to be 10%, which means that you've got $5, and as guys get eliminated, your stack is worth more and more. So in this particular case, an equity difference of 0.14%. If you want to figure out what that is in money, here I'm going to go right now to Start Accessories Calculator. I have a calculator on my desk, but you guys can't see that. And you should always have a calculator with you when you do this sort of thing, because calculators are a good SNG friend. and one punching in the chip stack. So we said that the equity difference is minus 0.14%. That means you're losing 0.14% of the total equity. Well, so we have $50 in equity, okay, and that's the total amount on the table. So a given 1% of that is going to be 50 cents, okay, so 50 times 0.01, okay, $0.5, and 0.14% of that is 7 cents. So in this particular case, it's a 7-cent error, and anything less than around minus 0.5% you can take to be relatively small, but still you only want to be making profitable shoves, and in this case, even though it wasn't a very big error worth under a dime, it still is a mistake, and we should have folded here, and hence the correct to shove are pocket pair 6 and higher, as well as ace 10. So it include ace 10, ace jack, suited ace 10, and anything above that. So this was a bad shove on my part. Now I learned the error of my ways, and I believe there are no other hands that I had a strenuous problem with. So now let's look at this next hand history. And here we are. There are none that it has a particular problem with, except let's look at this king-queen one. And here it is profitable to shove based on these assumptions. One thing it does assume is, of course, it depends not only on your hand strength and how much you're shoving, but how widely these guys are calling us. And you can click and find out what the assumptions are. And the most important one is usually the big blind, because if some guy's going to randomly call you, more often than not, it's the big blind. I can't shrink this too easily. But, oops. Here we go. So is he going to call with 25%? Well, yeah, that looks roughly reasonable. Okay, he's calling with king 10, any ace. He might actually call with queen jack, fold the ace deuce, but that's about reasonable. And in this case, we're winning a little bit, but not too much. And there's this edge difference, which means that you want to be not just making a play which is neutral in chips, but because it's easy to make a mistake in the calculations, you want to come out a little ahead. But even so, this is a reasonable shove, and solid shoves here include these hands, okay? Pocket pairs 4 and higher, ace 8 offsuit, ace 7 suited, and king jack suited. So again, for the low blind play, it's more of learning what's good to do, and you can post on the forums and stuff like that. When in doubt, play tight. But during high blind sit and go play, you can look at programs like Wizard that tell you quantitatively whether or not you've made a mistake, given assumptions like calling ranges. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this reintroduction to sit and go play, and have a good one.